Welcome to Charts Today, European Opening, and today's edition for Monday, the 5th of October, comes to you from London. And as always, we start by just looking at the dollar driving higher. So that's just a key thing about the market at the moment is the dollar strength. We are just a little bit weaker the last couple of days, but dollar pushing higher. Euro consequently weaker. Against that stronger dollar and just falling back from Friday's highs again. So whilst we are still above the cloud on the short-term chart, we do still have the longer-term picture dominating, and the dollar is rising against the yen, which tends to be a lead indicator. We see the dollar rising here, then it will rise against other currencies. Sterling looking stronger, having really progressed the last few days and back to that 130 mark, having been as low as 128. And against the euro, sterling looking stronger as well. And against the Swiss franc also looking stronger. So we're just seeing a resurgence in sterling the last few days with sentiment on Brexit improving. And against the Aussie dollar also looking a bit bullish on the short term. Bitcoin still just pushing lower today. Did jump a little bit on yesterday, but we are still seeing a generally bearish sentiment. US stock market was weaker on Friday. We saw the S&P down just 0.7%. The Nasdaq was down as well, and the Dow Jones Index actually held up better. It was only down just under 0.5%, but still looking weak on that medium-term chart. And the Russell 2000 Index just starting to climb through again. The smaller caps didn't fall as much as the bigger caps on Friday. The futures down this morning. The S&P future down a third, and the Nasdaq E-mini down just under a third. So it looks like we're going to start the week lower in the US, and consequently we're seeing the FTSE in the UK down this morning. Still just short-term bearish, and we have got a recovery target of 6% there, but the medium-term and long-term charts are fairly bullish, so are bearish. And if we look at the mid caps looking stronger in the medium term as well, but again falling away. The DAX in Germany down slightly this morning. Again, we've got a relief target here of some 6%, and looking at the CAC Quarante, not barely down. So still probably one of the stronger looking markets in Europe, having just finding some long-term support there, but hard to see how it will buck the trend against falling markets. We're seeing Japan down just over 1%. The Hong Kong market, the Hang Seng down over 2%, and the Chinese market down 0.4%, and India down 0.4%, and the Aussie market down just over 0.5%. Looking at commodities, Brent crude still falling away here. We've got downside targets now to 71.60 and $70, and medium term we're now through the cloud. This is the time of year where crude oil does tend to sell off, so we are just looking bearish here more and more, and unwinding some of these upside targets soon if we make new lows. Looking at WTI, also bearish as you would expect with downside targets here as well. So quite key there. And US nat gas actually looking much higher, jumped very significantly on Friday, and we're now sitting at $3.46. So the one market that's looking very strong indeed. Gold actually looking bullish as well, and about to make this medium-term transition as markets roll over. Gold actually recovering, and we're looking at silver similarly. US 10-year yield sitting at 3.19%, so actually now 3.2%, so we're holding on to some gains there as well. And the Bund also, we're seeing German bond prices falling away on those stronger yields. This data all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're running Metastock, from Metastock Zenith, if you're a private user, same data feeds basically. Looking at this data coming in from Yahoo, just looking at stocks across the board, so this coming in from Yahoo Finance. We see here the world indices pretty red throughout Asia. Here we see the Nikkei down 1.5%, for example. Again, all pricing coming from Yahoo data. And I've got my weekly, my 1%, my daily, my 0.5%, my daily with on-balance volume, and my relative to the Dow Jones Index. Again, all Yahoo Finance data. So 10% underperformance versus the Dow this year. Looking at just how the Nasdaq stocks closed on Friday, we saw Google was down 1.3%, Amazon was also down, but probably the big concern at the moment is Apple down 6.6%. Just warning on the Christmas period had dropped Amazon shares quite heavily after their results on Thursday night, and we are just seeing holding the relative strength trend. We do have further downside targets of 10% on Apple, and we are just starting to struggle to make new highs. So this is really an important chart in terms of how the market behaves. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple trades today. But Apple now looking to be a worry. The stock that really has held up the market, the biggest stock obviously, starting to look a little bit concerning. Facebook still looking weak and in the doldrums. And looking at some of the other stocks, uh, we saw Microsoft actually up slightly on Friday, so looking a little bit stronger there. But stocks like Netflix down 2.6%, Nvidia down a further 1.5%. A lot of these Nasdaq shares falling away. Tesla had a better week last week, building on the week before where we had a big jump in price. So Tesla is actually looking reasonably good. The Aussie market, we had some pretty big performances here. Green Cross up 18%. And if we look at the other end of the scale, we had EDX Group down 7%. So we are still seeing some pretty bearish looking charts in the market. In India, we had Axis Bank up. State Bank of India, Indian banks tending to do better. Most of the banks were up here. And if we look at Tata, we saw Tata Motors, interestingly, Jaguar in the UK in the news at the moment, and we're seeing Tata share price just really falling away there. So showing that underperformance. China, only a handful of stocks up. Shenzhen Securities up 7%, but lots down, of course. So really quite key there that we're seeing some really big moves down. And also Hong Kong, only two stocks up. And the Nikkei, we're seeing again Sapporo looking strong, but really not yet a recovery. And again, some pretty big fallers here. NTT down 8%. Looking at Europe, we see that looking at the FTSE 100, Everaz is the best performer this morning, up 4.7%, and looking strong. It's a rare sort of chart at the moment where it's trending up nicely, outperforming the Nasdaq by 57% this year. So not everything is falling, and we're seeing quite a lot of activity here in the market. Smurfit Kappa down 3%, Ashted down 3% as well, and we're seeing again stocks trending down. It's ideal to try and find these ones that are trending up, of course. Looking at the 250. We've got Energy and Oil up 4%, Auto Trader up nearly 3.5%. It's just not quite into a bullish mode here. A lot of choppy movement, but at least it's not falling like a stone like so many other charts. And Hiscox, a really big faller today, down 7%. And Thomas Cook also falling, and that chart looking pretty terrible. Looking at the Euro stocks across the board, we've got some pretty big performances here as well. Klondike Vorpak up 5% this morning. Better looking chart, bullish above the cloud here. Everaz again, we saw in the UK. Elisa has been a strong performer in Finland today. And also just looking at the downside, we see here Hiscox Group was there, Telnet down quite heavily, down 4%. So we are seeing, again, a very mixed picture. The sentiment is still generally quite bearish. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.